So we are now going live. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Randy Welsh, the Executive Director for the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance. We're glad that you came to join us today for one in our continuing series of wilderness challenges that are affecting wilderness stewardship in the nation. We're glad that you could find us today, since there was a little bit of a mix-up with the Zoom calendar feature. And inadvertently, it had said 1 Pacific when it was really 1 Mountain Time as the start for our webinars. This webinar is being recorded, so if you did not get a chance to make it on time, it will be recorded and available on our NWSA website. So we're thankful that all of you could make it today, as we talk about a topic that's been on everybody's mind for the last year, as we've all been dealing with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic one way or another in our daily lives and in our operational lives. And no, I don't have COVID, but I have had 1 vaccination shot and I'm waiting for my second. Just dry air. Anyways, everybody's been dealing with COVID in one way or another, and it's adversely affected our wilderness stewardship operations, both with the ability to host volunteers on projects, or just how we deal with crews and transporting them out to and from field locations. And all of us who are doing wilderness stewardship have had to address and deal with the COVID effects one way or another. Well, today we're excited to have with us a panel of experts from 3 different wilderness stewardship organizations that are actively dealing with COVID-19 mitigation measures, and are going to share some of the wisdom that they've acquired, some of the strategies that they've come up with to address the needs we have to deal with the spread of the virus. So I'm pleased to introduce to you Ben Berry from the Pacific Crest Trail Association. Ben is the Southern Sierra Regional Representative for the PCTA, and he's been very active in coming up with different COVID responses and strategies for not only PCTA, but for other trail and stewardship organizations to work from. You may have seen Ben's presentation at the National Wilderness Workshop last fall. Also with us is Chris Cutshaw, who is the Stewardship Coordinator for the Friends of Nevada Wilderness in Nevada. Chris has been working actively with a variety of volunteers and groups in Nevada. Their season's already started, and he's going to share with us some of the strategies that they've come up with to be able to put people in the field and to manage the potential effects of COVID. And it should be pretty interesting. And finally, we have Renee Patrick, who is here locally here in Bend, Oregon. With me, the Oregon Natural Desert Association. And Renee has created a unique way of dealing with the COVID experience and coming up with an independent stewards program that we're looking forward to hearing more about. It resolves the issue around social distancing because people are going out and doing stewardship independently on their own. And we're looking forward to hear from Renee how that's been put together and how it's working. So a great set of panels we're going to provide for time at the end of the 3 presentations. We're going to start with Ben, then move to Chris, and then we're going to finish with Renee. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentations. So if you would, as those questions come up, would you type them into the chat function, and we'll roll them up at the end and make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. So Ben, would you like to lead us off?
Sure, thank you for that introduction, Randy. Thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks to my co-presenters for being here as well. So again, I'm Ben Berry from the Pacific Crest Trail Association. Let's see, one more try here.
Oh, it was up.
It was, oh, great, okay. So I am going to talk about adapting programs across multiple units, and then I'm also going to talk a bit about recent changes to our volunteer and COVID mitigation plans, as well as some of the base things that have been there from the beginning. So just right off the bat, for folks who may not be as familiar with the PCT, it is 2,650 miles long. It goes from Mexico to Canada, and it's the Crest Trail, so it goes up over the highest peaks here in the far western United States, namely the Sierra Nevada and the Cascades, but a couple of sub-ranges beneath that. So you can imagine the PCT goes through national forests, national parks, BLM land, it goes on private land, it goes over easement, it goes through state parks. And even in the places, on here, it goes through 25 national forests. In the region that I facilitate, it goes through 3 national forests, but within that, there's 5 different ranger districts. And they all have different rangers, and they're all near different communities that have widely varying levels of comfort that's based on those individual program and resource managers, as well as the communities and what they're telling them. And then of course, we also have state guidance that differs between Washington, Oregon, and California. Individual hotspots, a place like Los Angeles is going to be much different than like Shasta County or something like that. So we've had to build that into our plan, and there's some things that work across all units, and then there's other ones that are just wildly different. So that's kind of the primer on the situation that PCTA was in. Some of the basic prevention that we did as far as our re-engagement plan that would apply to folks, whether you are just adapting what you're hearing on this webinar for a single unit, or if you're trying to create a spectrum where you can kind of meet a partner where they're at. The first is that we switched all of our paperwork and video tutorials to be electronic. And this is something that people like and is for sure here to stay. People, instead of having to sign a JHA, tailgate safety session, risk assessment, all that sort of stuff, we switch it all online. It's way easier for our record keeping. Volunteers and agency partners like it quite a bit more. It's easier to access, it's easier to get done. And this goes in line with our general goal of reducing the amount of time that people were in physical proximity, so 6 to 10 feet or less with one another. Originally, when we didn't know as much about COVID, we were really worried about the risk of fomites. So someone touching a tool handle and giving that tool handle to somebody else, or contact, or changing any of this kind of stuff. So the electronic paperwork meets that general goal of just reducing the amount of time that people are close to one another. The next is that we created a safety plan, which is what this presentation is generally based off of. And it's the same trail maintenance protocol plan that we send to folks or our agency partners as part of this. So I'm going to put a link into the chat box here. So if folks want to follow up more, that is the best resource on our webpage. And that webpage is going to have everything from this actual maintenance plan that is really comprehensive. It's going to have local engagement levels, and then it's going to have a whole bunch of other resources. So the links to like electronic paperwork, printable versions of all that kind of stuff, video tutorials that we've recorded, all that sort of stuff. So if folks want more than just the 10 minutes I'm going to talk, you're welcome to follow up with me. It's bberry@pcta.org. Or you are welcome to use these documents and make them your own. So the next thing that we did, because we go through so many different units, was we based all of this off of CDC guidance, and we supplied all of the PPE. So we encourage folks to bring their own hard hat, keep it, but if they didn't have it, we were going to give them a mask, hand sanitizer, all that kind of stuff. And we are still mirroring CDC guidance as best we can. So this is the real heart of the plan with what we devised. So you can see on here, we've got 5 different levels. Stay home, stay healthy is the first. That's where there's no volunteer activities, no staff presence, none of that kind of stuff. Second is level A. This is where scouting would be allowed. Level B is essentially day projects. Level C is overnight projects. And then after that, we've got peak engagement, which is where I hope someday we're all going to live with COVID, and that's just being back to normal. And the idea with this is that we could pitch this to our local units, and we would be able to meet them where they're at and where they're comfortable. It's also something that we could change over time, depending on the amount of mitigation we can do in that area, people's current comfortability, how many cases there are in that area, all of the sort of changing conditions that we are dealing with COVID all the time. And if you get into the plan in depth, or that link that I put in there, there's a whole bunch of different stuff in here with how many participants can come, carpooling, how far people can go to get to it. Originally, there was an hour requirement, a whole bunch of different things that have been updated. I think this screenshot is from an early version of the plan, and there's definitely been changes to it. And then we've got a link on our website that shows every unit across the PCT. So here we can see in the Northern Sierra region, the PCT, the Humboldt-Tiobe at this point had one ranger district and stay home, stay healthy. And then they had one right next door to it where you could have overnight projects. And these are things that have changed all over. I know the region that I facilitate definitely is all over the spectrum with what some units are willing to tolerate compared to others. That's on our webpage. So some of the recent updates that we did is that we have instituted a 14-day wait between air travel and volunteering. This is just something that we were concerned about if people were traveling really far out of the area. We didn't want them to be coming out on a volunteer project right away, so we just wanted them to wait 14 days. And really, there's still pretty spotty volunteer projects with what's available compared to what it was pre-pandemic. So we haven't heard a lot of complaints about that one. Folks have generally understood the high contact with that and the restriction. The next is that there's registration limits for new volunteers. And we originally had a 100-hour requirement because we didn't, again, want people to be physically close to others. So we were concerned that a brand new volunteer might come out and not know, how to brush out a section of corridor, and that the crew leader would have to come over and be really close to them, showing them how to do it, how to get close to branches, all that sort of stuff. And what we heard was that we think that we can mitigate it. Okay, masks work really well and we're outside, but that there's a limit to how many new people we can have. So at the crew leader's level of comfort and at their discretion, as well as PCTA staff, we allow new people to come out, but usually only one or two per project is where we're at for most projects. Some crew leaders are more comfortable with that than others. The next is that we started allowing equipment sharing if distancing can be maintained. So the thought behind this was that a lot of times, especially on overnight projects, everybody wants to crowd around the kitchen. And we didn't want that crowding and that socializing. But we understood that people going on overnight projects don't all need to bring their own personal backpacking stoves. So, if it's a group of 4 people going out, maybe they could bring 2 stoves and switch it back and forth, and they could do that without actually having to physically hand it to one another. And people are smart enough to be able to do that, and that they can be safe and be responsible with it. We removed travel distances for projects. That was banking on CDC and state guidance. We now direct folks to look at current county and state guidance for how far they should be able to travel out of their local areas at any given time. We changed cloth face coverings to masks. That was following research that showed indeed that buffs are adequate and fine for mitigation. So we just, instead of saying it has to be cloth, the general word mask does include all that different kind of stuff. We also eliminated specific protocols for sanitizing tools. We still do ask folks to clean them, mostly because it's good for the tools. Same thing, washing your hands. Although we aren't concerned about fomites, it's still just good hygiene. So why not ask folks to do it? This is kind of what we were thinking with the tool sanitization. If folks are curious about that, put it in the chat, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what we used to ask folks to do and why we got rid of it. The last is that we are currently drafting carpool guidance with CDC updates that includes vaccinated individuals. I'm not sure if it's gone live, but it will be any day now. And it should aim to allow vaccinated individuals to share a car. If 4 people are in the car, for example, one of them could be unvaccinated, and that's just in line with CDC guidance. And that's something that volunteers had asked us for a lot. This is a quick list of all of the different things that we are still using. We've got a frequently asked questions, an infographic, COVID-specific JHAs, and we came up with so much different stuff. We've actually got a screenshot down here. So we started doing crew leader Q&As and online video checklists, and that's just because there's been so many changes and so much different stuff. We wanted to create a time when our crew leaders and our network of volunteers could ask us questions and make sure that everybody understands. So that's mostly what that's for. Like a lot of other places, we've also been doing a lot of online trainings instead of our kind of flagship Trail Skills College event. We're doing intro to scouting, intro to trail maintenance, signage, a whole bunch of different stuff. And that's been a lot of fun. You know, everybody comes to do trail work, not just because we like to do the physical trail work, but it's also social. And this has been a fun time to engage new volunteers in a more diverse audience. So our takeaways with this was it's best to meet the agency where it is, to be flexible. And then, you know, there was so much stuff that was unknown. Be creative and just be thorough, do the best you can. I mean, this is kind of good messages for life all the time, but it's been especially true in these trying times. So with that, thank you everybody for your time, and I'll give it back to Randy.
All right, we'll have Chris Cutshaw from Friends of Nevada Wilderness.
All right, thank you, Randy. Just get this load in here. It's taking a minute. All right, can you see that?
It's up.
All right, cool, thank you. So as Randy said earlier, my name is Chris Cutshaw. I'm a stewardship coordinator with Friends of Nevada Wilderness. I'm just gonna go really quickly over our volunteer program and how COVID has affected that. I'm gonna go over our strategies for bringing it back, and then talk about lessons we've learned so far, because we've actually been doing some single-day volunteer projects. And I should mention that we do have a lot of paid crews, trail crews, and spring monitoring crews, but today I'm just going to go over the volunteer portion of our program. So on a typical year, we do a lot of single day and multi-night camping projects. We usually offer rides for our volunteers, and we usually do group meals, and the group meals are a huge part of our program and its culture. It's how we thank our volunteers, and it's how we build community. We also have, as probably a lot of you have run into, numerous staff and volunteers who would be in the high risk categories. And we also work with 4 different land management agencies. So we are getting a lot of different directives from all of them, and we're dealing with that. And so here's a little graphic to look at our volunteer hours in 2019 versus last year. So in 2019, we have over 6,000 hours donated by our volunteers, and that was down to about 1,000 in 2020. So obviously this is bad for our program, and it's also bad for the public lands and the agencies that we partner with. And then it's also been really unfortunate for our volunteers, who a lot of them really enjoy these projects, and it gives them a lot of meaning. So going into the 2021 stewardship season, we have a few goals, and the first one is obviously safety. We want to keep our staff safe, our volunteers safe, and also a lot of the communities we go through are pretty rural and isolated, so we want to make sure to keep them safe as well. And then this year, we really want to create some meaningful volunteer opportunities. So we want to be able to provide these opportunities for our volunteers that allows them to connect with other people, connect with their public lands. And then of course, we want to get some work done. And so the 3 ways we're doing that are our new and improved safety measures. We are really doing a lot more communication with our volunteers. And of course, we're staying flexible and humble. So our new and improved safety measures, a lot of these will look pretty similar to the ones everyone else is doing. Of course, you got the basics. We're doing masks, encouraging people to social distance, all the things, you know, if you're feeling sick, don't come out. If you've been in contact with anyone who had COVID, don't come out. Or if you've traveled in a couple weeks, don't come out. We are also eliminating our group rides for the time being, and this has been definitely a big loss for our program. A lot of our volunteers rely on these rides because we're going to like super remote places. But unfortunately, we just cannot find a way to do that safely. You just can't be in a car with someone for 6 hours and be safe. We are also doing tool and equipment sanitizing. So we're sanitizing it before we hand off to the volunteers, and we are asking them not to tool share as much as possible, and then sanitizing it at the end of the day. And then we've also been limiting our group sizes, and a lot of this is dependent on the land management agency in the district we work with. Some districts are still really cautious about even having anyone out. Some districts are open to the governor's orders for group sizes, so it really depends. And then we also have a whole policy for group food that I wanted to go over on its own slide. So this is my biggest slide here. Like I said, food is a huge part of our organization's culture. It's kind of the gathering place at the end of the day. And it's also a big way for us to say thank you to the volunteers. And so top left, you would see in a typical year kind of what our dinners would look like. Volunteers are walking through in a line, kind of serving themselves, getting whatever they want. But this year, we're doing it a little different. Last year, we didn't do any group meals, but this year we feel pretty comfortable bringing that back. And so I'll go over that real quick. So first off, it's important to mention that the CDC says that the risk of getting sick with COVID from eating or handling food is considered very low. So first off, that's a great place to start. We are requiring that it's only our staff that prep group meals. So in a normal year, our volunteers often bring out food to share. We're not going to be doing that this year. We are doing frequent hand washing before, after, during, all that. We always wear a mask and we always wear gloves when we're cooking and serving food. And then a big difference is we are going to be serving food to the volunteers ourselves instead of them serving themselves. Volunteers are going to be washing hands before meals and before filling up their water bottles from the communal water filling. They're going to be wearing masks served by us, and then we're asking them to sit 6 feet apart. And then I put a little picture of our hand washing station down in the bottom left there. It's a super handy little foot pump, and it's got a little soap container, and then it all fits in that little mesh bag in the front there. So super handy. And then this one is really big for success, if you ask me, and it's volunteer communication. So we have COVID safety measures provided in a PDF that I make available to volunteers before they RSVP. It's sent to them in an email right after they have RSVP. It's sent to them in a pre-trip email, and then we go over it together in a safety talk. The other thing is phone calls. So I think definitely with all these different changing rules, it's important for us to remember the old-fashioned way of talking to someone on the phone. So if a volunteer is coming out that we don't know very well, or we have to know for a fact that they don't read our emails, I think it's good policy to call them and actually talk about these things. And then the safety talk is obviously important at the beginning of the day. And what I like to do is empower volunteers to look out for each other. So what I would say to these volunteers is like, these safety measures that we're putting in place are for all of our protection, and we want to be looking out for each other. So if you notice that someone is going to fill up their water bottle without washing their hand, make sure to mention something. And so it's really about empowering volunteers to be eyes and ears for myself when I'm not seeing what's happening. And then for my final slide here, I was just going to go over some lessons that we've learned from the projects we've been doing so far. And so we've done a handful of projects in Northern and Southern Nevada, and we've taken a couple lessons away. So the first one is that volunteers have been very receptive to our new measures. We find that as long as they know ahead of time and they know what to plan for, they've been following it really well. The second one is that these added safety measures do take time. So I would encourage anyone who's planning to work with volunteers or groups to expect a little bit less, because it just takes more time. You have to have smaller group sizes, and there's just more to look after. The next one is that folks are going to take off their masks at some point. So encourage safe ways for people to do that. I mean, I think it's really noble of us to think that people are going to wear a mask for 10 hours while they're working out in the hot sun. But the truth is people are going to want to take it off to put on sunscreen, get water, and just like breathe. So I think it's important to establish that that's totally fine as long as they get far enough away from the group, and just kind of set down the ground rules for that ahead of time. And then one thing we've run into is a lot more last minute cancellations. So a lot of these cancellations are from people being really cautious, which is great. But we've had a lot of folks who cancel last minute because a family member they live with is feeling sick and they haven't had time to get tested. They were exposed to someone with COVID, or they themselves were just not feeling well and they didn't want to put anyone at risk. And then finally, be prepared to change your plans. So probably all these things I've told you will not be applicable come July. Who knows what the world will look like. But yeah, just be ready to change it before and during the projects. And that is all I have for you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at chris@nevadawilderness.org. I'm always happy to share the materials we've put together and just talk about things. A lot of our materials we've put together with help from other organizations and agencies. So I'm always happy to share that. And then I'm going to hand it off to Renee here.
Great, thanks, Chris. Get my presentation up. So I'm here to tell you about what the Oregon Natural Desert Association decided to do this year because of COVID. So I've been working for ONDA for about 5.5 years now. Originally came on to help establish the Oregon Desert Trail, and in the last year plus have expanded to build and manage our Independent Stewards program. So going into the 2020 stewardship season, we had a full slate of group volunteer trips planned. We usually hold between 20 and 40 trips throughout the year, with upwards of 500 volunteers going out and doing things like building beaver dam analogs, which is what's happening on this slide. We remove obsolete barbed wire fence that might hamper animal migration, and we maintain trails in a lot of the wilderness areas that we work in. But because of the pandemic, we canceled or rescheduled our trips, then canceled those rescheduled trips, and finally came to the realization we're just not going to hold our group stewardship trips in 2020. So during that time, we had also established some COVID protocols, some guidelines, and had been interfacing with other stewardship groups, just figuring out what is everyone else doing, much like the topics we're talking about today. So then came the opportunity. So ONDA did have an existing independent stewards program, which we started in 2015, but it was a very small part of our offerings, and it hadn't been very effective. So I was tasked with redesigning the program in late 2019 to try to make it more impactful and more effective. So when the pandemic was continuing into last fall, a time when we typically start working with our agency partners to set up the next year's stewardship programs, we had no idea what 2021 was going to bring. We still didn't know about a vaccine. So we decided then and there to make the Independent Stewards program the opportunity of 2021 and not hold our typical group stewardship trips at all. But that would make it an incredible big lift, and we would have to look at things like automating systems in order to scale it, looking at creative ways to train and educate our volunteers, all of those important factors in the program. So then became our planning phase. So the first step that we went through to developing this was for our stewardship program to sit down with our conservation, campaign staff and our legal staff and really brainstorm. We were thinking big. What are all the ways that stewardship could help further our conservation campaigns or help bolster our legal work? And these are things that an individual could do. So we were dreaming big, and a lot of the ideas we came up with are more long-term, lofty goals. But what came out of that were about 40 different project ideas. So then we had to go through and prioritize and think, what is going to be an enjoyable volunteer experience? Is it feasible for someone to do this by themselves or with their household or family? And we had a number of factors. We kind of whittled down the list to about 20 projects. And then we also had to take into account the work we were already committed to doing with our agency partners. Oftentimes, we're set out, we have work planned for the foreseeable next few years. So we tried to see if we could modify some of that work. So then we had to figure out what technology to use. So because I'm a long distance backpacker and I've done a lot of hiking, I've really come to rely on the Gaia GPS app, which is excellent for navigation. And in fact, as we started looking into it, we realized we could use their team accounts to set up a project. So each of the different projects will have their own team account. And so all the volunteers will share that one account. And so they can see if someone drops a pin saying, I found a patch of invasive weeds here, then later another volunteer can go out to that same location, do some mitigation efforts and drop another pin and said cleared. So we're finding creative ways to use these shared accounts to communicate and also track the work that's being done. We have forums on our project pages. So we're trying to create a sense of community. So even though volunteers are going out on their own, or like I said, with their households or families, they can communicate to each other. So if there are issues like access, a road is washed out, a certain area has been damaged, they can communicate with each other and have that sort of small group feel, even though everyone is separate. And finally, we use an app. We're starting to use an app we learned about at last year's National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance Conference. So Julie Mock with the Colorado Mountain Club gave a presentation about the RIMS app, which is Recreation Impact Monitoring System. And so when we were looking into it, we found that this could have a lot of applications to the work we're doing, especially the enhanced monitoring work. So we sat down actually this year with the Oregon BLM districts, and they agreed to work on it with us. So now we have a program where we're going to be monitoring wilderness study areas, and Colorado Mountain Club, the BLM, and ONDA, we're working on a custom WSA assessment model. And then we're also going to be using the Recreation Impact Monitoring System as designed. Some of the projects will include about 40 miles of trail monitoring in the Steens Mountain Wilderness, monitoring trails in the Badlands Wilderness, and other things like that. So that's a pretty cool success story to come out of the conference. So then we started building the framework, and this graphic really shows you what my brain has looked like the last 6 months, trying to figure out all the systems, how we're going to automate, how everything's going to talk to each other, how are we even going to do this? So we decided for each project would have a password protected page on our website. So this page will only be given to the volunteers that are specifically invited to each project. So we're able to keep some of the more sensitive information private. For example, if someone's doing the sage grouse lek monitoring, we don't want to advertise where those leks are. And then so in each project page, we have an exhaustive list of things to know. And we really wanted to use videos as a way to have a personal connection to our volunteers. And so either the stewardship staff, the campaign staff, or the legal staff will give an overview of the project, why the work is important, and how that data or monitoring the volunteer is doing will help us make decisions or will help in our efforts out there. So we have exhaustive details on how to access the tools you'll need, things to print and take. We do a lot on responsible recreation and how to be out there safely, safety information. And we really want people to enjoy their time and develop their personal connection. I think it's a unique thing to be out there outside of a group opportunity and really connect and find your place in the desert. So we have a whole section on desert bathing. So next we needed to automate as much as possible. So we build a lot of our forms in a program called Form Assembly. And so this talks directly to our database that we use, which is Salesforce. And so everything from the first form, the interest form people fill out when they come to us, we're gathering all the information about who they are, but also what their interests, what their skills, and what their preferences are. So we are trying to really match people to the correct project. So for example, if they need a high clearance vehicle and they need to be able to drive on rough, remote roads, they need to be comfortable monitoring, navigating in backcountry situations and using a smartphone. Those are all questions we ask, and then we'll use that information to match them to the right project. And then we also have a reporting form. So at the end of the project, once they're done, they'll come back and they'll fill out all the project details about the actual work that was accomplished. And again, that automatically updates our database. So it takes out a lot of the time-intensive data processing that we have done in the past. And then comes the fun part. So I call myself the air traffic controller. So I'm looking at all of the volunteers that come in, and we have this master spreadsheet, everything from what season they want to go, are they available on short-term notice, the types of projects, how many days they want to go out, what type of camping they want to do. And so I go through and try to match the people and the skills to the right project. I've learned already that if you don't do that, you might spend a ton of time trying to prepare someone or educate someone on a certain tool, when if I had done my due diligence and gone through the spreadsheet, I might have seen that, oh, they don't have a smartphone to use for this project. I will assign them to a different project. And so we try to make incentives as well. So as soon as a volunteer submits their report, that triggers a status and they get put into a drawing, a monthly drawing. So everyone who volunteers in a certain month goes into their names into a hat, and they win some prizes from some of our business members. So everyone who volunteers gets entered to win. We try to make it relevant too. So we have a hashtag, and that feeds into our sort of success takeaway page that we have on the website. And so anyone that uses Instagram can tag their photos and show everyone what they're up to on these independent projects. So the implementation, we launched this in late February to our members and beyond. And so far, I'm happy to say we have about 325 people who have registered. We've asked over 200 of those people already to participate in projects. A lot of these projects are coming online throughout the year. So we may have a project that's not available to do until June, but we're already looking at their preferences and trying to match them and say, hey, pick a weekend on your calendar. We think you'd be a good fit for this. So people are already planning ahead of when they will go out and do this work. And we've already had over 700 volunteer hours this year. So people are responding to it, they're enjoying it, they can bring their dog for the first time, as long as they don't chase wildlife. So we're finding that people are really interested in this type of group trip or independent stewardship opportunity. So we hope we will do many group trips in the future, but I think building these project pages and the response we're getting means this will be valuable work we can offer in the future. Not everyone wants to have that group trip experience, and we have so much work to do across Eastern Oregon that there are plenty of opportunities to keep this program going in the future. And I will drop my email into the chat box if anyone is interested in connecting on this. So I think we're probably ready for question time. Is that right, Randy?
Okay. Well, great. We have had 3 great presentations with lots of information, but now it's time for you to ask your questions. So please, would you type them into the chat function and address them to either one of the three individuals or just a question in general, and we'll figure it out from there. I think the first question that I have, Chris, could you explain your hand washing setup a little bit more for folks? I think if you're familiar with river running at all, you've probably seen that setup before, but Chris, why don't you walk people through how you set up your hand wash system?
Let me pull up that photo again so I can show it. Oh, it's going to take a minute. Yeah, it's the exact one that pretty much every river outfit uses, as far as I know. So there's that picture of it again. Let's see. So yeah, it's got a on the left side, you'll see like the little tube that just pops right down into some form of water supply. So for us, it's our 5-gallon jerry cans. Just pops down in the bottom there. And then whoever's using it would pump the black ball piece there with their foot. And that pumps water out of the copper mouth up there. And it's super easy and straightforward. And then the gray water just collects in the bucket there at the bottom. And if you look online, you will find all kinds of versions of these. I just bought one off of Amazon. It was $80. You could also build your own, and people have built some really crazy, very fancy versions of this. But this for us works super well, and it's really easy.
Yeah, I've made my own for about $15 or $20, just using a small cutting board as the base with the gas pump on attached to it, and then just hoses to get you from one source of water to the gray water.
Yeah.
And they are pretty easy to build, so I encourage everybody. Nobody should be without one. Multiple sites on.
Oh yeah, my coworker Peter
sharing.
just dropped one in the chat box there. You can look at. Yeah, they're easy to build. They're easy to buy, whatever works for you and your time.
All right. Well, while people are thinking of their questions and typing them in, I have a question for all three of you. And you've touched on it a little bit, but in general, what's been your reaction from people who are volunteering about the risk of getting COVID on any of the volunteer trips? And how receptive are they to the adjustments that you've made in your trips, looking at years past to now? And what was the overall impact you think that these changes are going to have for the future?
Hey, I'm happy to jump in and go first.
Yeah, why don't you just go Ben, Chris, and then Renee.
Well, in brief, I think that the view of volunteers across the PCT has been a microcosm of what's happening across the nation. The whole spectrum is there. We've got people who want to throw a lot of trash at us for acknowledging that COVID exists, and we've got people who are just eternally thankful that we're taking it seriously and doing the best that we can. And I think that that's kind of true across the board. Looking into the future, like I briefly touched on in my presentation, a lot of this stuff is here to stay. The buckets that Chris shared are great. We use the same ones. They're definitely going to stay. The sign-in and paperwork that we're doing is also great. Being able to have an online portal for folks to check out the current volunteer status is also great and here to change. So I think that it's been frustrating and trying, no doubt, but we've learned and grown in a lot of great ways.
Let's see. We have had almost entirely positive responses from our volunteers to all of our different safety precautions. I think especially at this point, everyone is just so used to wearing a mask when you go places, having things just look different. But I think also in general, we as a program have always like really strived to be safe and have that be like really upfront. So a lot of our volunteers are just very used to us having that be a huge focus and constantly harping on them about, PPE and being safe. So yeah, we haven't seen a lot of issues with it. Yeah, long term, I mean, I'm really glad that the hand washing stations are taking a bigger focus. I think that should have been something we were doing years ago. Our Southern Nevada folks have been doing it for, I think, like 3 or 4 years. And it's just, yeah, a lot of these safety precautions are good, what COVID or not. So.
Yeah, I'll say because we are not running the group trips, but we do get a lot of people who are not comfortable going out by themselves. So they're really eager for small group trips. And now that people are getting vaccinated, we've gotten a lot of questions. Well, now are you going to offer trips this year? And then we try to explain it takes sometimes 4 to 6 months to plan, and the cycle of getting these, what seems like a quick 2-day trip, it takes a lot more effort. And since we decided 2021, we will not, even though we're fortunately getting vaccinated, we're not going to change course mid-year. So that's been an important piece we've had to explain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been interesting that some of the unforeseen consequences of the COVID and the impact it's had. Our paper just announced that the flu season this year was virtually non-existent because of all the safety precautions that we've been making for COVID. And then there were only like 3 or 4 instances of people being hospitalized for just the common flu, and that's just outstanding. So maybe we'll have a side benefit of no more flu season in the future, even if we have a COVID season. Ben, I've got a question for you about your carpooling requirements. You mentioned that you were allowing carpooling when people were vaccinated. The question was, is that a decision that you based on CDC guidance or just on practicality?
Yeah, and this is related to the first question you asked about how volunteers are reacting. So for volunteers who are on the other side of the spectrum who may not be as happy, one of the things that we've had the most success with, not just because it's defensible in this way, but also because we aren't epidemiologists or subject matter experts when it comes to COVID, is just mirroring what CDC tells us to do. So in short, yes, the CDC came out with guidance for carpooling with vaccinated individuals, and we're basing that off of similar guidance that is also for indoor gatherings for vaccinated individuals that's on the CDC website.
All right. Renee, here's a question for you. It might be an inside joke, but how much connection do you need for Gaia communication?
Oh, it's a good question. So when set up, because we're using an Onda team account that we invite volunteers to, and we have a premium account, which is paid, you can download the maps for offline use, so that we have pretty detailed instructions and some training videos. And we're actually adding more because the Android interface and the Apple interface are a little bit different. So we're tweaking those videos as we go. But essentially, we instruct our volunteers to download all the materials on Wi-Fi at home, test it on airplane mode before they leave. But it should function 100% without any cellular connection. So it's quite useful in that way. And then when they return from the project, get home, put their phone on Wi-Fi again, it will sync, or you can ask it to sync, which then on our end, we can log into the Gaia account, and anyone else who refreshes their account will see the data that's been added.
Okay, I think I missed it. So Gaia is the app that you're using?
Correct, yes. It's called Gaia GPS.
All right, and Gaia GPS or Gaia GP?
It's GAIA GPS. Yeah, it's an app for both
Gaia
Android
GPS.
and Apple. Yeah, it's fabulous for off-trail, for any kind of navigation, shows you where you are in real time related to the map that you download. Thousands of options for different maps.
Okay, and is it available on the App Store or the Google Store?
Yep, it's all available. There's a free version you can use that does not allow you to download the maps to take into an area without cell connection. I actually use the private land layers a lot because much of Eastern Oregon is fenced but not signed, or it's private but not fenced. You need to know where you are if you're on public land. And so there's a private land overlay that you can put so you can make sure you're staying on public land. It's very useful.
Okay, well, great. We'll have to check that out. It sounds like it'd be a very useful app. So give one last minute for anybody else that would like to ask a question. While we do that, I'll just want to thank our participants, our panelists, for presenting today, sharing the information about their programs. We hope that it's been useful to you in the audience for the status of your own stewardship projects, and we wish everybody well as they are working on those projects this year. I just let everybody know that our deadline for our NWSA funding programs was last Friday, and we received 24 Wilderness Stewardship Performance Project proposals and 93 Trail Stewardship Partner funding proposals. So we will be working through those in the next few weeks. Our goal is to have selections made and announced by the end of the month, so that we'll be getting back to your groups hopefully fairly shortly if we have any questions, and with a final result. Looking pretty optimistic that we will be able to fund quite a few projects this year based on the dollar amounts that were asked for and the money that we have to distribute. And looking forward to an exciting summer season for people to be getting back out into the woods and doing stewardship projects. So thanks everybody for submitting those. And thanks again for coming to our webinar today. We'll look forward to seeing you again next month. And thanks again to our panelists for their participation on today's webinar. So from NWSA, we wanted to say thanks, everybody, and we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.